I need some traction. You need some traction.
Lloyd Lobo here, co-founder at Boast AI. Boast automates billions of dollars in R&D tax credits and innovation incentives for entrepreneurs. Today's traction session is brought to you by Boast AI Launch Academy in partnership with BCF Ventures, Growth Blazers, Lazarides Institute, and Founder Institute. Super excited today because our speaker not only has the best voice I've heard on the planet, but he is also a super experienced, phenomenal founder across industries, Forex founder. And he's going to share with us today all the common problems that young startups face and how to solve them, not based on his learnings alone, but learnings from interviewing dozens of startups, from the highs of billion-dollar payouts and market smashing success to the depths of impostor syndrome and bankruptcy. Dan Shapiro, welcome to Traction. Thanks for joining us.
Lloyd, thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here.
That's the voice that separates the men from the boys. I'm almost embarrassed interviewing you when you talk. Dan, I don't know if we're allowed to share this, but Dan's brother is a professional radio host, right?
It's true. It's true. He's got the real pipes. I just make do with a microphone in my best impression of him.
He's got the best. I guess he's got the better pipes, but you have the better voice. Awesome. And your work's been featured on NPR, Wall Street Journal, on the front page of New York Times. You're a PR machine. Your game, Robot Turtles, has been sold everywhere from Target to MoMA. You're a mentor at Founder Institute, and they're one of our partners.
Yes, absolutely.
500 startups, tech stars. You've been awarded more than 30 patents, and an engineer from Harvey Mudd. Man, you have quite the experience and background. Currently, you're a founder at Glowforge, a startup that created the first 3D laser printer. Tell us more about your background. How did you go from engineering at Harvey Mudd all the way to where you are today? And that incredible voice. How did you resist the radio?
It's funny, but I had a moment when my first company on Tele was mobile services for camera phones, but I started my career at Microsoft out of school, working for big companies. I worked for somebody else's startup, a place called Wildseed. We made a camera phone for teenagers. It was the first phone based on Linux before that was a good idea to do. The company never turned into much. And I got to start this company, SparkBuy, which was comparison shopping, got acquired by Google, created this board game, wrote a book, and I had a moment. And it was funny. It was after it was during, as I recall, during the Robot Turtles Kickstarter campaign. And I was looking online, and I was vanity Googling, so I was looking for my name and for the board game name. And what I saw, I found this forum, and it was a forum of people who design aspirational board game designers. And I didn't know that existed, but turns out it does. And there are tens of thousands of people who want to make board games. And they were so mad at me. They were like, who is this jerk? We have all been working for years to polish and refine our board games. We've been play testing. We've been strategizing. We've been talking to experts in the field and networking and going to conferences. And this bozo comes along out of nowhere and thinks he's entitled to go publish a board game. And I was like, I had the normal range of reactions to that. Like, first I was like, my feelings were hurt because strangers are saying bad things about me on the internet. And then I was like, haha, I'm better than you. And then I got over all my sort of like stupid childish emotions. And I started thinking about that. I was like, why have I gotten to do this? Why have I gotten to do things time and time again that other people work their entire lives to do, not always with any degree of success? And I started, this is now over a period of, days and weeks afterwards, kind of counting up the privilege. And there's the obvious, being a white guy in a world that places unfair weight on that and gives undue and unearned credit for that. That's a huge source of privilege. My parents are both professors, so I grew up in a household that was upper middle class, valued education. Parents paid for a big chunk of my college, and I could go to an amazing college and study the things that I wanted. And then I learned to make things. That was my education, how to create things. There was a moment when I was playing with when Robot Turtles was a bunch of inkjet printouts on my printer at home, like just paper cutouts, and the kids were playing with it. When I thought, I wonder if I could make this a game. And one of the first things I did was I Googled board game factories, and I called a couple board game factories, and I said, hey, what makes a game easy to manufacture and what makes it hard to manufacture? And I remember one conversation with a company that ultimately wound up manufacturing it. They said, oh, good question. Nobody ever asks us that. But here, decks of cards, easy. Plastic miniatures, hard. Dice, timers, all the standard bits, easy. If you want any of those things custom, hard. If you want cardboard, here are the sizes of game boards that are easy. Here are the size and shapes of tokens that are easy. Anything else is hard. And so I was like, oh, okay, great. I'll just design the game to use all the parts that are easy. And that ability to make things coupled with everything else was transformational, knowing how stuff gets made in the world. And so, boy, the network, the privilege, the background, and all those things add up. But the one sort of missing piece was knowing how to make stuff is such an unfair advantage in the world. It's like the same way when I was 7 years old, my parents got me a personal computer and I knew how to make stuff digitally. I also knew how to make stuff physically. And that's ultimately what inspired me to go build a company out of Glowforge instead of me just geeking out over lasers. So Glowforge takes industrial equipment and puts it on your desktop the same way my parents took home a supercomputer or a mainframe and put it on desktop when I was a kid. It does that and gives you this unbelievable technology that was previously reserved for heavy industry and gives it to everybody. So everybody gets that creative superpower of being able to push a button and make things. And I get to bring forward that gift I was given and give it to other people.
You wrote this book, Hot Seat, the Startup CEO Guidebook. Why did you write this book? And tell us
And I made
more.
the cover bright orange, so if it's anywhere in the background, you can see it. In fact, if anybody out there watched HBO Silicon Valley, you'll see that the CEO in the show has the book on his back shelf, the bright, which is kind of terrible if you think about him, that he's getting advice from me. But yes, sorry, you were saying.
So why did you write that book? What do you talk about in that book?
So when I founded my first company on Tela, we were making cloud services for camera phones back in the pre-iPhone days. I would buy coffee for anything that moved and say, "Tell me about startups," and give me that advice. And I am so grateful for the advice that I got. And there were not a lot of people, especially in like 2004 when I started looking at this, writing about things. I learned probably the most from a guy named Brad Feld, who was a VC, who was blogging, one of the first really well-known bloggers in the startup space. It took me a decade and a half, but I finally got Brad to invest in one of my companies. He's on my board now at Glowforge. And so he was always one of my heroes, but he was somebody who paid it forward in advising people he'd never known or met through writing to this audience. The thing that drove me nuts, though, was when I'd sit down and I'd talk to some entrepreneur or venture capitalist or something. And I'd say, so how do you raise money? And they're like, well, it's easy. You just call through your network and you tell them that you're doing it, and be sure to tell them there's a really hot deal and they have to jump right now. And everybody's excited about it. And you set up a bidding process and do the whole thing in 2 weeks to really, and I'm like, you are from Mars. Nothing you're telling me is relevant to me. You are clearly speaking from a completely different world. You have, like, I have a bunch of privilege. Your privilege is way bigger than mine. And so you are clearly thinking about how you would raise money today, not how I, who doesn't know anybody, who knows no investors, knows nothing about venture capital, how I'm going to do it. And I found that disconnect really frustrating. I also found it frustrating when I'd ask for advice, and what people would tell me is how they did things as if it was the only way. I love to hear the stories, like, here's what I did and here's how it worked. What drove me a little nuts is when people would be like, and this is the only way to do it. And so I remember when I was raising, it took me 9 months full time doing nothing but, like, I was startup CEO with 2 co-founders, and the entirety of my job was to raise money. And it was 9 months before the first angel committed to the round. And that was awful. It was really terrible. The company was going to go bankrupt and fail before it even started because co-founders were doing their job. I wasn't doing mine. And I remember thinking, I am not going to let this go out of my head. On the other side, when I finally managed to make this work, if I finally managed to make it work, I am going to tell people what happened. I'm going to tell them the real thing. I'm not going to give them some polished up BS, whatever. I did raise money. I can't tell you I did it in any useful way because it was a series of bizarre coincidences that just came about from 9 months of working hard and playing every lead I got. And finally, ran into a guy at a conference in Barcelona who I was supposed to have met in Seattle and who blew me off there, and hit it off at a party there at this, it was a wireless industry conference. And then he managed to pull things. It's not a story that's very useful to anybody because it's so specific. And then I made a habit of talking to as many entrepreneurs as I could to try and help them with whatever I had learned along the way. And it was after raising, I'd left on Tela, merged the company with PhotoBucket. It was doing well, started a new company, and people were asking for advice. And they said, how did you raise money for SparkBuy? And I was like, oh, I just called up the 5 investors who I know. And oh no, I'm that guy. So I sat down and worked with O'Reilly, who's famous for publishing technical books, and said, I want to put this down now before I forget everything, while I still have the knowledge that's relevant. And that's where that book came from. It's me trying to tell all the painful stories that people gloss over, mine, and even more so founders who are willing to share theirs, and tell what really happened. So I'll give you an example. If you talk to most founders, say, over coffee or beer, about what happened to their company, they'll probably tell you about product market fit. They'll probably tell you about, eventually ran out of cash. They'll probably tell you all the usual sorts of things you hear about. In working with Founders Institute, in working with other startups one-on-one, of the early stage startups that I really know and that really trusted me, 100% of them had founder conflict. And almost all the failures were connected to that conflict. Yeah, they never found product market fit. Also, the CEO and the head of product couldn't agree on things and were at loggerheads and could never make it work. Yeah, they ran out of money, but one person was spending like crazy trying to make it go, and the other person was scrimping, and they wound up being frustrated and burning through it. Founder conflict is at the heart of almost everything. But when you're sitting there at an early stage startup and there's 2 or 3 of you and your biggest problem is each other, you feel like idiots because nobody's talking about this. It seems like you're the only people in the world who can't even get it together with your own company. And you're looking and going, this is going to destroy us. We can't even, what are we doing here? And it's so painful to have it happen, but it's 10 times more painful to think you're alone in it and to think that it's not happening to anybody else. So that was my goal with the book, was to shed some light on those dark places and offer some stories, not necessarily advice. Some places there's advice, but mostly options. Here's how other people have gone through it. Here's how they dealt with it. Here's some of the stories I can tell because I was in the middle of it. So I can declassify the classified information and tell you what was really going on.
Awesome. Let's dive into it. We've got 45 minutes here. Folks, if you have any questions, type them in the Q&A tab. Dan's a 4-time entrepreneur. He's raised money from crowdfunding through every other means possible, and he's interviewed hundreds of entrepreneurs. I've done the same. I don't like reading books. It's not that I don't like. I have a hard time reading books and flipping through 2 pages even. And so I interview awesome entrepreneurs twice a week to share insights, and I interview them, and that's how I learn. So it's great. So what are the top 5 F-Ops CEOs should watch out for that you found?
Boy, the first one I just listed, which is in the earliest days, it will be hard with your co-founders, but you got to find a way to make it work. The second one is thinking that there's a one right way to be a CEO. I had a great conversation with somebody on my team, and she said, I realized that I expect something of you that I'm not getting, and I just want to put this out there. Every CEO I've ever known has been like the delegator in chief, and their goal has been to delegate every single thing. And I've seen that that's not you. Like, what is your thing? And I was like, oh my gosh, how have I never asked this question to myself before? This is so thoughtful. And she was like, who's your CEO role models? Like, what do they do and how do they work? And I started talking about how the thing I aspire to do is delegate almost everything. But at the start, when you're the founder, you got everything. And then like, I want somebody, first off, I want somebody to take over finance because I am not qualified and capable to take care of our customers' money. So let me go get a CFO first thing. Second thing, operations, manufacturing, supply chain, logistics. So important for us as we make the, actual physical products, the Glowforge 3D laser printer, and so on. But then on the opposite side, I grew up in the world of product. Product is where my passion and conviction is. And when I look at great, let me use the word great gently. When I look at highly successful CEOs, not all of whom have exhibited great characteristics in their personal lives, but the ones I've probably been closest to have been Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, and Larry at Google. And when I've gotten to see how they operate, they lead from the front in those areas. And so they for product or for engineering, or in the case of Ballmer for sales, they are the head of those departments practically, if not in title, even as they delegate everything else. So that second mistake is, I'm probably not going to get to 5, but that's fine, is that you're trying to pattern match against this notion of an ideal CEO. You need to be the CEO that your company needs and that matches your needs and skill. And that's not going to be the same for everybody. So finding your way and what's right for your company. I'd say the third thing I'll lock in with that is getting stuck on the idea that you are the CEO and that it is your company. Because I think that this is one of those, like, if you love something, set it free. This is one of those places where you need to say, I'm building something bigger than me, and I'm going to bring people around me who can tell me when the company and my skills start to move out of alignment, because it happens constantly. If your company is growing, then you will start to become the wrong CEO for your company. And the only question is, can you develop and grow and change to become the right CEO again, the right CEO that the company needs? So I advise people early on to build a board of directors for their company. Bring in people who are wiser, more thoughtful, have more perspective than you, people who deeply, passionately want to see you succeed and also to see your company succeed, and who can be the first people to pull you aside and say, hey, Dan, you know what, this isn't working. You're not delegating fast enough. There's problems with the business model, whatever it is. And here's how you need to grow so that you have the chance to grow into the CEO your company needs, and that you don't lose sight of that along the way. What are we up to? 3? and then I think those are the big pieces, because if you can be the CEO your company needs, if you can be the leader that your company wants you to be, and if you can be on that growth track so that you are constantly rediscovering your company and constantly building your own skills to what it needs, you can make the rest work.
Definitely. No, that's some great advice here. So let's go through that journey, right? Founding. I mean, you talked about co-founder conflict. What's your advice on formulating your idea, allocating equity, and not arguing yourself to death?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, because you found a company because you have belief and you are willing to take a risk, and because you're willing to jump off the edge of a cliff with somebody holding hands. And it may be your best friend of decades, or maybe somebody you just met, but you are doing something powerful together. So some of the things that I've actually, I guess I'm going to answer all those with one thing, which is the natural habit of new co-founders, is to avoid conflict. And avoiding it can be not talking about it. Avoid it can be accommodating the other person. And avoiding can be solving problems through compromise instead of through hard conversations. But you got to do the opposite. You got to sit down with your co-founder and say, we are going to go through hell together, because no startup journey is anything but. There's great moments, but there's always these descents into the pit of despair. We're going to have to practice having really hard conversations from the get-go. So let's open every can full of worms we can find. Let's have all those hard conversations, and let's not let ourselves get derailed by easy ways to put it aside. So a great example of that conversation is how to split founder equity. And I wrote a blog post about it. You can look for it. There's a more detailed and updated version of my book. But long story short, you should have hard, painful discussion about what each party is bringing to the table. And the short checksum at the end, the advice to make sure you got the right thing is if you wind up going 50-50 split, then you probably dodged the hard conversation. But there's going to be a point a year or two in, or a month or two in, where you're looking at each other across the table. And, you know, it happened in my company. I told you right at the outset, where it's like, Dan, you've got one job, is to raise money, and you're not raising money. And then it happened later where one of my co-founders was falling down at what I needed them to do, not for lack of trying, but like couldn't bring home something that we said we needed. And we all took turns feeling like, you know, the bozo. You have to have that behind you. And you have to have the history of those hard conversations so that you can make it through to the other side when they happen, because they will. And it is way better for your startup to implode in a co-founder disaster when it's just the 2 or 3 of you than when you've got people whose livelihood depends on you.
Definitely. No, that makes sense. If you had to summarize the splitting, though, the ideal split, is there an ideal split at that early stage, and allocation of equity to co-founders and early stage managers?
So I mean, the ideal is that that split reflects the realities of what everybody is bringing to the table. So I'll give you an example. There was a company that I was talking to that was recruiting me to join them as CEO years back after I finished my first company, and it was 5 college students and their professor. Their professor had successfully founded 2 venture-backed companies with positive exits, like tens of millions of dollar exits for their investors, plus 5 kids straight out of school who had thought of a cool idea with their professor and wanted to start a company. So what's the right equity split? It's not even Steven. That company was, you know, basically unfundable except for the professor who brought that in. And with that professor, it is the hottest ticket that you could imagine. So you think of equity as ownership of the pie. The size of the pie is how much outside investors think it's going to be worth. I don't know what they wound up with, but I would say that that professor should own more than half the equity in the company, and the 5 college students who, you know, if they'd been swapped out with 5 different college students, would the investors have known? You know, were there other brilliant college students who could have done it? Probably, you know, splitting whatever the rest was. Very unusual case, but I share the extreme to show what that's like. And you see that in many cases where people come together with different amounts of value to the organization. Now, let me take a second and say, it's not that those college students had less worth as humans or less worth as people, but the value of the company is what investors are willing to pay for it. And when you're talking about splitting equity, you're talking about splitting up that value. So you have to go look who can make that early stage company worthwhile. And the thing is, if you're successful, every single one of those people will do incredibly well for themselves and disproportionately better than folks who come after. And so you mentioned managers and later employees and co-founders as well. The amount of equity you get is proportional to what you bring, but also proportional to the risk you take. So the founder who shows up early with no company, puts their own dollars on the line, is going to be the you know, majority owner of the company for a long time and have a much larger stake than somebody who comes along maybe a year later when there's 3 people and a real business, and they're coming in, and, you know, the company is probably not going to go bankrupt overnight because there's something there. They're not staking their own dollars to launch the company. They're getting to benefit from all the work that came before. So risk pushes down equity grants significantly. That said, you know, there's no right numbers. Again, I put together some sort of like rough estimate formulas in that blog post and in the book that you can use as a jumping off point for discussion.
What's the blog post?
The only wrong answer is 50-50, I think is the title.
Okay, sounds good.
If you look on danshapiro.com.
I'm going to link it here. Awesome. There's a few questions here on early stage fundraising. How do you get investors to take big bets at the early stage? How do you convince investors that are risk averse? I mean, raising from people, institutional investors or angels, is likely not the only route, right? Like, you know, you did crowdfunding. So walk us through, how do you evaluate your options for fundraising, and where do you focus your energies?
That's a great and difficult question. the different written a lot about this, but trying to distill it down. I would start out by saying, are you right for crowdfunding? Because if you are, it's non-dilutive capital where you basically get to pre-sell your product and then use that to go build what you've done. It's a pretty great deal if you can do it. Not everything's right for crowdfunding. Oh, yeah, there it is. Thank you, Lloyd. Oh, and it's somebody asked about the mic. It's a Yeti, one of the blue Yeti mics. If you are a product, that's good for crowdfunding. But actually, the biggest piece of crowdfunding is, are you on a mission that you want to invite other people to join? If that's the case, if your product isn't just a product, but it's a cause that's exciting, that gets people talking, that gets people passionate and engaged, then you have something that you can crowdfund. So as an example, when I launched Robot Turtles, the board game, I said, I talked to folks in the board game industry and they said, this could never work in the board game industry. Here's why. And so when I went to people, I said two things. I said, first, it's a board game that teaches programming principles to preschoolers. So now 90% of the world does not care at all about me, and you've already left because you're bored. Now, I have a way in one sense to find out the 10% of the world that cares about what I'm doing or might care about what I'm doing, and they can find out from that. And by the way, it's one sense that they can tell their friends and they can forward an email and they can tweet and they can post an Instagram. Like, it's really simple. So I have a way for people to find out if they're excited or not. And then I said, this is a game that I want to exist, and it won't exist unless you want it to exist too. So would you like to join me in bringing this into the world? And that message, that really simple message, was what created the viral chain of people forwarding emails and sharing and everything else. I didn't spend a nickel on advertising for Robot Turtles, which was at the time the most backed board game in Kickstarter history. Spent no money on advertising. I had, I think, one or two pieces of local news about it, but that was about it from folks I knew. It wasn't really powered by that. I didn't buy a giant email list. The marketing was, I emailed everybody who I'd ever heard of and said, literally, I've only ever done this twice in my life. When I launched Robot Turtles, when I launched Glowforge, I dumped my entire Gmail contacts, 5,000 people, everybody I'd ever talked to, and said, hey, I'm doing this new thing. You know, if you'd like, here you go. And from there, it was people going, you know what? You've got a preschooler. You know what? You care about STEM education. Let me tell you about this thing. And that was what powered the success. And I'll tell you, like, a good friend of mine launched the game that beat me soundly by a factor of 100. Launched a game called Exploding Kittens on Kickstarter, which has the most backers of any crowdfunding project ever. And I worked really closely. He helped me with Robot Turtles. I helped him with Exploding Kittens. Same thing, not a penny on marketing, but people who were passionate and excited. And in his case, it was because he partnered with a cartoonist who had a big online following. My friend Alon and Matt Inman, who wrote The Oatmeal. And they didn't spend anything on ads either, because people who are passionate about this and who were excited about the artwork and the idea shared it with each other. And people were excited about the story they told together, because that crowdfunding campaign was one big story that people could participate in. So if you've got a product and you've got a story, crowdfunding is a fantastic opportunity.
Definitely. And email helps. I think people say email is dead.
Email's
but
everything.
I mean, we get like 300 to 1,000 people register for our webinars. We do 2 a week, so I can't promote it more than once via email. And email drives everything because it's in your face, and if it's a dedicated message, it gets you. Awesome. So I want to dive into the next realm of things here. You say you don't ask for intros to investors. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I was in college, I remember somebody was like, hey, could you introduce me to girls? And I'm like, this freshman. And I'm like, that is not the right question to be asking. Like, let's unpack that a little bit. Girls are not a monolithic thing. They're not a resource. They're not a connection. And it is very insincere and authentic and will not lead to anything if that is the way you approach this. So let's talk about how you can be your best self. Let's talk about how you can connect. Let's talk about how you can build relationships. And it's the same thing with investors. If you say, introduce me to investors, you're not doing your homework. You're not thinking about this the right way. And you are trying to take a shortcut for which there is not really a shortcut. The long way, the much harder way, is to understand yourself, what kind of business you're building. Then do your homework with investors and understand what they do. So you're reading all their websites, their blogs, you're going through LinkedIn, you're spending time understanding who those people are and where those connections are. And when you've done all that, then you're going to say, oh my gosh, here are 10 people who I think would be really interested in what we're doing. Now I'm going to approach people who we have in common. And I'm not going to ask for introductions yet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get those people excited about what we're doing, those people that we have in common. I'm going to enlist them as people who are advocates. I'm going to be totally transparent about this, right? So I'm going to go up to our mutual friend and say, hey, I'm working on this thing. I'm really excited about it. I want your help on this a little bit with some introductions. But before I do, I want you to be a believer. So let me explain to you what I'm doing. Let me get your feedback. Go through that conversation. And then at the end of that, you can say, and could you introduce me to so-and-so? Because I think they'd be interested because this and that. And then if they know what they're doing, they're not going to introduce you. They're going to send a letter, or they're going to an email, or they're going to call up and they're going to call that person. They're going to say, oh my gosh, I just met the most amazing company, right? They do this, they do that, they do this other thing. I think it's fantastic. Would you be interested in meeting them? And that person will be like, oh, heck yes. Because that is a really easy introduction to say yes to. And they're not going to feel under the spot. They're not going to feel like, oh, I just got spammed by some random stranger. They're going to be fired up that a real connection was made based on mutual interest and excitement, and you are going to get the best introduction out of that you possibly can. So, do you need help in meeting people? Absolutely. Do you do it by just saying, give me investors, like I'm ready? No, that doesn't tend to end well. There's a lot of work that you've got to do to be your best self and to be your most authentic relationship and connection to make that work.
Definitely. No, I think that's some great advice. Find people who believe in you before you go that route. You had a great success with crowdfunding. You've done angel funding as well. In terms of funding, what was the end goal for you, and what did you achieve?
Different for each company. When I was starting my first company, I really just wanted to create a startup and to build something meaningful and lasting. I loved our product. I always have to love my product. I loved our product and I loved our customers. I always love customers because they're the people who are invested in what you believe in. So it's easy to love that relationship. But fundamentally, what I was doing was something that was exciting, but it wasn't deeply meaningful to me. In the way that feels like your calling. And so I was raising money to build a company, and I was raising money to build a team, and I was raising money to create success, and I was raising money to make money. And that was okay. And that worked reasonably well. Compare with today, when I discovered this technology. So the through line here is I was working on prototyping for the board game robot Turtles. And I discovered this backwater technology that hadn't been really improved since the 70s, CNC laser cutter engraver technology. One thing led to another, and I got this industrial carbon dioxide cutting laser installed from a factory in China into my garage. And it was terrible and it was ridiculous. But after weeks of messing around, I could push a button and something beautiful would come out. And it was completely different than all the 3D printers that people were talking about, because it was making beautiful things out of leather and wood and cardboard and cloth and chocolate, all kinds of different materials. And it was fast, but it was a disaster, and it was expensive, and it was hard to maintain and use. And I wound up just mesmerized by this technology and by what it could do. And I brought a whole procession of entrepreneurs from my network, again, because the fourth time you do it is really different than the first. But I brought through the idea, though, of showing the people you know what you do is really fundamental. And I've come to believe in this. Show early on, get the advice, set aside your worries about secrecy, because it's more important to have a good idea than to have a secret idea. And I just brought folks through and I showed them, and they're all like, Dan, you're insane. What did you put in your garage? And, are things okay between you and your spouse after you did this? And then I pushed the button. And minutes later, something beautiful would come out, and they'd say, oh, okay, that was pretty cool. And then after months of just putting these ideas out in the world. A friend said, "Oh, you should meet my co-founder. He likes hardware from my last company." And I had lunch with him and he said, "I just built a CNC laser cutter engraver from scratch in my garage. I think you might be onto something." And so we had some of those hard conversations I talked about earlier. Hey, if somebody 6 months from now came up with $100 million and said, "I want to buy the company. Would you want to sell? Would you want to sell?" We talked about that. We said, "No, we didn't." What kind of company is it going to turn into? It could be the next Black & Decker. And I looked at him. I'm like, I don't want to lead the next Black & Decker. I don't want to lead a tool company. I don't want to build something that does stuff and that delights some people. I want to build a company that makes the world better. And we started having crazy founder talk, and we talked about the world of the Star Trek replicator, where things are made on demand and where you push a button and stuff comes into life. And, like, it's stupid, but a couple of weeks ago, I needed to prop the garage door open. And my kids were moving their school into the garage and setting up this great thing because it's starting to get a little warm here in Seattle. And I needed a doorstop. So I went to Amazon and I look, and at Amazon, somebody will injection mold a rubber doorstop half a world away, throw it on a container ship, move it across the ocean, put it in an Amazon warehouse, inflate bags, put it in a cardboard box. Somebody's going to come up, drive to my front door, all that for $7 and 2 days, which is pretty amazing. But what I did, might have it around here somewhere, was I used my Glowforge and I pushed a button and I printed a doorstop. Nope, it must be stuck in the door. Thought I had it around here. I printed a doorstop. It took 2 minutes. It cost me 17 cents. In a world where we create things for ourselves instead of a world where things are made for us far away, that is a fundamental change to the fabric of society, to a more sustainable and empowered world. That's something I could be excited about. So when I raised venture for Glowforge, it was because that was step 0 or 2 or 3 in bringing around that world that I wanted to exist. And I was inviting people to go on that journey with us.
Definitely fantastic advice here. Let's talk about leadership. How do you build a strategy and culture for your team that will survive the good times and the bad, right? Like, because, people are super excited when they join, but then what happens is roadblock hits and one foot is shaky. The second roadblock hits, one foot is out the door, and the third roadblock hits and they're out the door. And I view everything as relationships, right? Your relationships with your customers, your colleagues, your community, and your investors is the same. Like, if you treat people like a transaction on the way up, they treat you like a transaction on the way down, particularly for investors. If you're optimizing for the valuation and saying, "Oh, I'm going to run this process for this time," then they give you a valuation, they're in, first roadblock hits, shaky, second roadblock, one foot out the door, third roadblock, either they're out of there or you're out of there. But how do you deal with this in a company? Because, investors you're dealing with once a quarter. But in a company, employees, growth, hyper growth, all these challenges, how do you set the strategy and culture for the long haul?
I'm going to try and not fall into my own trap and not answer your question and tell you this is the one right way to do it. Instead, I'll
100%.
just tell you how I do it or how I try. There were a couple things. First was founding a company that's something I truly believe in, where I could invite people to join me in that mission. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody who joins you feels like in our case, that empowering creativity was the single thing they cared about most in the world before they joined. But when they join you, they're signing up to do that with you. In another world, I might go to work for, I don't know, SpaceX or Blue Origin. I think space travel is cool. If I went to work at those companies, it's because I am signing up to share their vision. It doesn't mean that was the most important thing to me in the world before I got there, but it means that's what I'm a part of. And talking to people about that. Here's what we're doing. Here's the trip we're going on. Here's why I'm so excited about it. Do you reach out your hand? Do you want to join me in that? That's the first piece. So you're there for the same goal, the same mission. The second piece, and again, I'm not going to say this is the right way to do it. I'm just going to say here's how I do it. I try to run my company with as standard best practices, plain vanilla as possible, except for a small number of things that make us different. And then for that small number of things, I lean way into them, down as far as the rabbit hole can go. One of my board members said, Dan, you're the most, he's Brad Feld. He's on a ton of boards, written some of the best books about startups. And he said, Dan, you are the most risk averse CEO that I know, except when you're not. And I said, oh, thank you. That's actually really helpful for me in my own framing. Like, I'm going to do everything the normal standard way, except when it's really important. And so what that means for me is coming up with a small set of core beliefs and saying, these beliefs completely encompass everything about our company. Not the usual like vision values thing where it's all there. And then you're like, why are we raising our prices if these are vision and values? And people are like, because we want to be rich, but that's not on our vision and values. We just sort of, we don't say that part out loud. No, I actually wanted the complete set of constraints on being who we are, on self-actualizing, on being great team members, on fulfilling our values. So of course, given that we make the Glowforge 3D laser printer, I made a little puzzle out of it and everything because I need fidget toys in my life. And what it says is we hire diverse and amazing people. We take care of each other. We delight our customers, present and future. And we build value for ourselves and for our company. And everybody's a shareholder at Glowforge. So those are one and the same. And there is no decision we make that does not exist in the tension between those 4 points. So something as simple as like, what's our policy for staffing our customer support team over the holidays? Okay, we want to take care of people, so we want them to be able to take holidays off. But we want to delight our customers, so we want to provide support for them over the holidays. We are trying to build value for ourselves and our company, so this isn't pour huge numbers of dollars into additional staffing. Aha! But hiring diverse and amazing people means we are bringing in people who celebrate diverse holidays and who are willing to take care of each other. So some of the folks who are not celebrating can help cover for some of the people who are celebrating. And we spend a little more to bring in extra contract resources. So we pull a little bit from one, we lean a little bit on another, and every decision happens in the tension between those cornerstones. And that's what people can sign up to. And it's not foolproof. People have their price, and if somebody's willing to pay them twice as much, they may want or need to leave in order to do that, take care of their family. And as a side note, getting over the feelings of betrayal and upset that come when a trusted and cared for team member leaves is really hard. And it took a long time in my career before somebody could leave the company without me feeling like it was a personal insult, affront, betrayal. But when you build a culture that people know what they're getting into, they sign up to go on that mission, and they can adopt those values as being their own. You build a lot of resilience against that. And it takes a lot for somebody to have to leave. And that's the most that you could ask for, because ultimately everybody should go to the place where they're going to be happy and fulfilled and that meets their needs. And the best you can do is provide that for some wonderful people for a long time.
Definitely, that makes complete sense. I've read a lot. I've interviewed a lot of leaders over the last couple years, and what I find is that what do people want? What do I want? And I've distilled it down, and it aligns with a lot of what Daniel Pink says as well. Is like, what do people want? Do they want be a part of a big purpose? They want autonomy. They want so it's mastery. So purpose, mastery, meaning be great at what they're doing and move on and achieve greater things. Autonomy, you don't want people breathing down your neck. And the last thing, which Daniel Pink doesn't talk about, but I think I've distilled that from talking to hundreds of people, is reward. And reward is in the form of praise, recognition.
You can't leave that one out. Yes.
Yeah. So it's got, because purpose, mastery, and autonomy without reward, it only takes you so far, right? Then people get burnt out, and then they feel like, yeah, I'll serve the same purpose elsewhere. So reward is a very big part of it that I've found. Now let's get into here board management, team management. As a CEO, you're just managing people around you. How do you effectively manage your board, argue with your team, and play the CEO card, and when?
And I'll take a minute to just separate out the CEO role as leadership and management, and those things should never be confused. And you can be a great leader and a terrible manager. You can be a great manager and a terrible leader. And you can build skills in either or, but it's really helpful to know which one of those skills you're trying to build. Are you trying to coordinate people for a functional outcome and bring them to, align their efforts to create the outcome that you want, management? Or are you trying to inspire people, provide vision and direction to bring a unified sense of purpose, leadership? It's great when you can do both. Then when I think about that at the company, I've already talked about the greatest tool, which is having a shared set of, call it what you will, mission, vision, values. We call these our cultural cornerstones, but having that shared alignment. And by the way, you want to bring that in early. If you go to our jobs page and scroll down, the first thing you see at glowforge.com/jobs is this. P.S. We're hiring. Can I say that? Anyway.
Yeah, of course. Glowforge is hiring. Boast AI is hiring too. We added 50 people in the last 3 months. I made a very controversial LinkedIn post, and it's like almost going viral. And I'm getting messages from it. I think it's the only post I made that has so many comments on it. What I said was the term culture fit is the biggest BS trope in the history of business.
Hate it.
It's turned into euphemism for racism, bias, and a gatekeeping mechanism to leave people out. Oftentimes, when people talk about culture fit, don't look at what they say, but look at their actions. And they're generally looking to hire people who are similar. Like, hey, does that pass a beer test? Or can I connect with this person? Align on values. And you said that right. Align on values and purpose, but hire different. You don't grow by hiring people who are similar to you, right? Openness is the biggest enabler of growth.
Lloyd, can I testify here?
Yeah, 100%.
My co-founder, Mark Goslin, and I are 40-something white guys.
Yeah.
When we founded the company, we sat down and said, if we build this company by and for us, we will fail. Because the majority of people in this world who want, deserve, and need to create things do not look like us. So diversity and inclusion for us is not a nice to have. It isn't just a moral imperative. It is an existential threat. If we follow the traditional model of, the founders are rubber bands and everybody's measured by how much they stretch the rubber bands, like how well do they fit into that world, we're going to build the wrong company. We're going to get the wrong customers, and we're going to be some tool company. We're not going to change the world.
Definitely.
We hired as aggressively as we could to bring in the most diverse and inclusive set of folks. And by the way, you can see for yourself. You go to glowforge.com/about-us. We are proud of who we are, and you can see everybody and their titles, first name and titles there, so you can see to some extent how well we've done. When we launched our product, 25% of our customers were women. Today, it's 63% of our customers are women. We would not be able to address the diversity of people, of interests, of backgrounds, of hobbies, of passions, of society, had we not gotten that right. And I could not agree with you more about the way to do it. What I said to Mark, my co-founder, was, okay, if we are truly hiring amazing people and we are building representation into our company, and people who come from underrepresented communities are being courted by so many companies who figured this out. So that means it's harder to hire amazing people from underrepresented communities. We can't have any other constraints, or we have to have the smallest number of other constraints, saying, and also we have to want to have a beer with them, and also they have to go to the fancy school, is stupid. It's going to rule out too many people. So what's the smallest number of constraints that we can put on our hiring process? It's going to be, they've got to be amazing at what they do, and they have to share our values. And if those things are true, then what we look for is culture add, not culture fit.
100%. And that was the comment I made with the hashtag culture add, and hire different, don't hire similar. Align on values, align on purpose. Different people bring different things. Me and my co-founder are exact opposites, right? Like literally, he does a different set of things. I have a different set of superpowers. And your job as a founder is to identify, harness the superpowers and fix the gaps, right?
Absolutely. And you can only do that if you build a team around growing your culture, not, I shouldn't say you can only do it. I'm falling prey to my own trap. Nope. There are plenty of homogenous cultures, all white guy startups that do a great job of making money and serving whatever it is they do. So I'm not going to say that's the only way you can make it work, just not the way I want to make it work, and not the way I believe truly great companies are founded.
Definitely. Now I want to get into board complexity and just people complexity in general. As a CEO, how do you deal with that? Like, what's the most complex, messed up, difficult, convoluted situation you've been in, and how did you navigate it?
I mean, here's the core of the board conundrum, which is if you're the CEO, the board is both your boss and your employee. That is, their job is to help you and help you build the company, and also they hire and fire you. So it's a weird relationship. A great board is spending 90% of their time talking about how to support you and make you succeed, and 10% of their time talking about whether you're the right person to do the job or not. And a great board will always be talking about that. So for example, there's a board best practice that I've always instituted right from the get-go, which is at the end of a board meeting, you spend your board meeting talking about the challenges that face the company. And then at the end, you step out. And I'm enough of a control freak that is awful. But I say, I'd like y'all to talk about me now behind my back. Then I drop from the Zoom, or I walk out of the room, or whatever it is. And afterwards, I sit down with one of the board members and they say, here's what we talked about, but I'm not in the room for that. And that conversation is Dan the right person to lead the company? Is Dan growing at the rate we need? What's he missing? How can we support him? And it's important that that happen without me there, so that it can really happen and not fall prey to the, he's in here, so we have to watch what we say. And I get to grow from that. I get to be a better CEO from that. I'm going to say 3 months ago, I came back and the board said, you know what? Your company is growing at such and such rate. You have such and such experience. We think you should get a coach, because that's going to be the tool that's going to help you to grow and scale. And here's some tools to help find a coach, and here to support this, that, and the other. The board is now writing a very big check for a very amazing person to teach me to be a better CEO. Merlene Saintil, incidentally, who is unbelievable, who would have been my hero had I known her before that had happened, and who I have learned so transformationally much from. Here, you can see how fortunate I am to get to learn from such brilliant people. And that has made me a better CEO. Time and again, engaging that board as your partner, as your growth partner, as your critic, but critic who believes in you and is only doing that to help support you and make you successful. That is what can drive you forward. So using your board in that role, the outside vision, the outside perspective, the connections, and the neutral party who wants to see you and the company succeed, but the company succeed first and help you succeed in the context of that. That's where I see that work. That said, I think it goes wrong more often than it goes right, because when you have people who have a tremendous amount of power and influence over an organization, there's so much incentive for things to go sideways. So the best book on this is actually written by one of my board members. I'm super lucky. I've literally got the guy who wrote the book on my board. Brad Feld wrote, let me be sure I get the name of the book right. Board. I believe it's just called, Startup Boards. Getting Startup the most Boards out of your board of directors.
Co-authored by one of my really, really close friends, Mahendra Ramsinghani. It's a must read. He did a session on Startup Boards last year that's got, I think, 12,000 views on our channel with the founder of Cloudflare, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, female founder. And it's a great book and great session to watch. I'm also an LP in Mahendra's fund. So yeah, good connections there.
Absolutely. And, some of that, I'll actually tell you this is a little tactical, but one of the things that I found most useful for that and to put in place is you send the board everything they need to read before they start, so they know what your business is doing. They read it. That's an important step. Then you say to the board, in email, what are the 3 things we should really dive deep on during the meeting? and then your whole board meeting, we do, for a year, but my earliest startup, we did one every month. The whole meeting is going deep on those areas, getting strategic support and growth. So you're not doing this slide flipping business summary. Everybody's got that out of the way beforehand.
Definitely. Now, last but not the least, the end game. We're all in it to make money, right? I mean, there's a few things you can ask for. What do you care about? Power, money, or impact, right? But ultimately, you can't ignore putting food on the table and the family around you and the friends around you and the close ones around you. I mean, it's every founder's dream to exit with grace. How do you decide when to exit and do it gracefully?
The first thing we can say here among friends, it's okay to be really worried about your outcome. It's okay to look at the life-changing dollars and say, this is really important to me. And I say that here among friends because when you're sitting in the boardroom, you usually have to pretend that's not the case. You usually have to say, nope, we're building value, we're building company, we're going for the stars, and so on and so forth. Or at least when you're pitching, it can be like, say, hey, I'm building this thing because I really want to make a lot of money, and that's really important to me. Doesn't always fly. So I believe in a high degree of honesty, but also as the CEO, you kind of got to be the leader, not necessarily the transactor in chief. And so that's something that you sometimes don't say with your out loud voice, but it's important, and it's okay that that's important. On the flip side, as your company grows and matures, you start to talk about that with your board and with your leadership. Like, hey, look, most of my wealth and the future of my family rests on this company. So for example, I see two paths. We could take an exit to an acquirer and make that work this way, or we could keep going. But if we do, then it's important to me that I have some way to provide for my family in the meantime. I want to sell 10% of my shares, or I need to take my salary up to something that lets me harvest some of the value that we've created together. So that ultimately, when the time comes, when you're looking at an offer from somebody, you can do that with a clear head and aligned interests around what that's going to mean. So when's the right time to sell? There's a lot of triggers. It can be that there is somebody who wants to buy who is throwing dollars at you. It can be that there is, and it's too good to pass. It can be that there's something incredibly hard about your company ahead. You're not sure you can do it. And now is the right time to take an exit so you can harvest the value you've created rather than take a new competitor head on and dive deep for years. It can be that things aren't working. And so a graceful exit that lets the team keep their jobs is better than running and potentially going into a wall. Only ultimately you can decide whether whatever potential's on the table exceeds whatever the risk and opportunity is ahead. But I will tell you, no matter what happens, no matter how long you waited or how good the exit is, it's so sad. It's so hard to say goodbye to something you've created and built.
Definitely. So since you're doing that, you're going to have to say goodbye to this thing you've built, and it's important to disassociate. Often founders think of it as baby and have got these family references. You gotta realize that at some point your children leave the house, right? And how do you disassociate while also making sure you've made money from it? What is the most common difficulty founders have when exiting their business? I mean, your company SparkBuy was acquired by Google. How did that process go? How do you maximize value for yourself as a founder?
You don't, because founders who try to do that wind up ripping, wind up cheating their colleagues and their investors out of their hard-earned dollars. Here's what I recommend, and what I did with SparkBuy. You talk to the potential acquirer and you say, here's how I need to structure this conversation. I am negotiating on behalf of myself, my investors, my employees, all of us together. And that puts me in a conflict of interest. Here's the way I'm going to resolve it. First, I'm going to negotiate the value of the company, because my first obligation is a fiduciary one to the shareholders, which include the employees. So we're going to talk about how much we're going to pay, and I'm not going to talk about any step 2 or 3 until that's done. Step 2 is I'm going to talk about what my employees get, who you're hiring, what the comp looks like, and everything else. And then when that's done and locked, only then will I talk to you about what I get and what my package is and everything else. Here's what's going to happen, which is the acquirer is going to say something to you like, hey, look, we're really excited about you joining. How about if we take $5 million off the price of the company and put it in your pocket in the transaction? To which you say, that's step 3. we're going to talk about the value of the company and only the value of the company. And I have a fiduciary obligation to my shareholders to do that first, because those interests are not in alignment. And it is only your values and your ethics that are going to prevent those from getting wrapped up. And I've seen founders sell out their co-founders, sell out their leadership teams, sell out their shareholders. And, you know, if you can do that and look at yourself in the morning, I guess, go forth, but I can't. And so that's the way I keep that clean. That's the way I make sure I can see myself in the morning. Oh, Lloyd, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's been great. Where do we find you?
Dan Shapiro on Twitter, and at Glowforge to see what it is that we're building and how you can build things with us too. And at danshapiro.com for some really out-of-date blog posts, but hopefully some stuff that might be helpful. And hotseatbook.com to learn more about my startup adventures and advice.
Thank you so much, Dan. Wishing you great success, my friend. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend coming up.
Thank you, Lloyd. Thanks everybody for coming.